Alright guys, welcome back to Underground Science, and in this video, we'll be talking about another type of anemia, which is called hereditary spherocytosis. Alright guys, so let's go and get started. So first, right, notice the word, it's hereditary spherocytosis. Alright, so because it says hereditary, we know it's genetic. Alright, so it results in a mutation of our genes, right? So it's a mutation of our genes, right, in our DNA, and the mutation actually causes, so the mutation of our genes that causes, it actually affects the cell membrane of our red blood cells, all right? So the mutation of the genes, of our genes in our DNA, right? Remember genes, we undergo DNA transcription translation and we make proteins. Well, there's specific genes in our DNA that code for the proteins that hold our specific structure of our red blood cell that's actually present on the cell membrane of the red blood cell. And the mutation in those genes that later get transcribed and translated into proteins that code for the specific proteins in our red blood cell's membrane that hold the biconcave shape of a red blood cell, the mutation leads to malfunction of those proteins that hold our shape of red blood cells. So what this will lead to is that the mutation of those genes that code for the proteins that hold the shape of a red blood cell leads to the malfunction of those proteins, right? So some examples of those proteins are, for example, ankyrin and spectrin, right? And there's other proteins also, but these proteins are the main proteins that usually, right, that for people who don't have a mutation in those genes, right, that can lead to hereditary spherocytosis, these are proteins that help maintain the red blood cells, right, biconcave shape. So it pretty much helps these proteins and also I should also mention that these proteins are present on the cell membrane, all right, of the red blood cell, all right, at least near the cell membrane and on the cell membrane. So, and then it's going to help again maintain the red blood cell's biconcave shape, right? So remember, it's like a biconcave shape looking like that. And so we have these proteins that are here on the cell membrane, right? These ankyrin and spectrin proteins, and there's other proteins too, that actually all along here that help maintain the shape. However, a mutation in the genes that code for this protein that later get transcribed and translated into these proteins, there's a mutation which leads to the malfunction of these proteins. So the malfunction of these proteins, so let's go and add that in. So now let's draw what happens when we have that mutation, right? So the malfunction of these proteins will no longer result in the red blood cell shape being like this. It's going to result in a sphere shape, all right? Hence the spherocytosis. So now it's going to be a big sphere-shaped red blood cell. All right, so now it's going to be our new red blood cell with the mutation, all right? So this is with people who have hereditary spherocytosis, so with the mutation. And so now we can see that it's a big sphere shape, and it's not in the regular shape of a red blood cell that it usually was. So if it's not in its regular shape, it doesn't work as well anymore, all right? So the red blood cell so because of the new big shape that it takes place, right, because of the mutation of those ankyrin and spectrin proteins, it can't perform its amazing job, right? Its amazing job of delivering oxygen, right? Delivering oxygen to our tissues. So as we saw in the Haldane and Bohr effect also, right? So it can't do that anymore as well, right? So it'll still try to, but it can't do that as well as it used to, all right? Because it's in a much bigger shape. And this also means that you can get things like a splenomegaly, where it's the enlargement of your spleen because of the high pressures near the blood vessels of your spleen, because these red blood cells can actually go and get stuck in the blood vessels near your spleen because of the increased size. So it will indicate that it's much It's much bigger now because of hereditary spherocytosis. And so this can lead to one of the bad things that it can lead to is a splenomegaly. All right, so splenomegaly is pretty much the enlargement. So instead of saying increased size, let's just go and say the enlargement of your spleen. And this happens because of the high pressures of the blood vessels so let's say this is a blood vessel coming towards the spleen, right? And we can have this huge hereditary spherocytosis red blood cell here that can block some of the blood that's coming to the spleen, right? Or it can actually increase in pressure. So this can lead to an increase in pressure, and then soon will lead to an increase in size of the spleen. All right, so things like that can happen with people who have hereditary spherocytosis. And so what's going to happen here is that because it starts blocking some of the blood vessels, we have white blood cells, right? We have white blood cells that can arrive and can phagocytose this, right? And start actually destroying your red blood cells, right? Start eating up your red blood cells. So eats your red blood cells up, right, but through phagocytosis, and breaks it apart with its lysozymes, right, and its own vesicles that it has. And so what's this going to lead to is that as your white blood cells keep on coming and destroying your own red blood cells because it's too big and it's blocking your blood vessels, it's going to lead to a low amount of red blood cells, right? So, and remember in iron deficiency anemia, we said that we were working with microcytic anemia. Well, here we said that the red blood cell increases in size. So that means, remember, our mean corpuscular volume will then probably show it will be greater than around 95 femtoliters. All right. So that means hereditary spherocytosis is going to be classified as macrocytic anemia. All right, macrocytic anemia. All right, guys. So that's the basic idea of hereditary spherocytosis. Remember, it's another type of anemia, and remember, anemia we said that the two basic bullet points that we should remember about anemia in our iron deficiency anemia video was that low amount of red blood cells or lack of functional hemoglobin. Well, here we do have low amount of red blood cells because the white blood cells that come and try to destroy the enlarged red blood cells that block off some blood vessels, right? For example, to our spleen, leading to enlargement of our spleen or splenomegaly. So we do have a decreased amount of red blood cells. So right there, that's one thing that can classify as anemia, right? And so that's going to lead to a bigger size of our red blood cells because of our mutation of our ankyrin and spectrin proteins, right? So mutation are genes that will actually undergo transcription and translation, and will usually, in people who don't have hereditary spherocytosis, we would have genes that would undergo protein synthesis, and we would make proteins like ankyrin and spectrin proteins that would hold the red blood cell shape, right, properly in this biconcave form. However, people with hereditary spherocytosis have a mutation in those genes that code for the ankyrin and spectrin proteins. So we have a malfunction of those proteins, which can lead to an irregular shape or a too big of a shape, right? Too big of a spherical shape, which is why this anemia is called hereditary spherocytosis. If it's too big, we said it can start maybe blocking off some capillaries or arterioles, right? That can lead to an example. So this is an example that can lead to the spleen and cause enlargement of the spleen. And we said that also because it's blocking off some blood vessels, we can say, we said that white blood cells will also come and start destroying these, right, through phagocytosis. And that can lead to low count of red blood cells, which can be classified as anemia that we also see in a hematocrit. All right, and then we also said because we have a bigger spherical shape due to the malfunction of our ankyrin and spectrin proteins, we said we classify hereditary spherocytosis as a macrocytic anemia because we have our mean corpuscular volume, right? So there's just a way of seeing the size of our red blood cells that's greater than 95 femtoliters. So it's going to be macrocytic anemia. All right, guys, so that's the basic idea of hereditary spherocytosis. And I hope this video made sense to you guys. I hope to see you guys in my future videos. We'll talk about more cool topics about biochem, and physics. And so I hope to see you guys there. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, and subscribe. All right, see you guys later, and stay safe.